mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 5 of Apple TV Severance, entitled, I gotta read this one, The Grim Barbarity of Optics and Design. This episode title is tied to the painting that we see in this episode. Irv goes to the printer to print out the map on the back of the on the back of the card, the OND card from Bert that lets him know how to get back to OND. And when he goes to print it out, printing of this painting come out, and it's a painting that depicts the OND group killing the MDR group. And this appears to be actually part of a plan, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Later, Irv meets up with Bert in the conference room, and Dylan shows up and locks Bert in there, and they have this whole argument about not being able to trust OND, etc. Bert takes them back to OND, and while Bert and Irv are talking, Dylan discovers the same painting, but with everything in reverse. It depicts MDR killing OND, and the title of that was like the Macro Data Refinement Calamity, something like that. So there are paintings that exist that depict one group killing the other in both scenarios, and you know, with the opposite group killing the other group. And it sounds like Kobel is not only allowing this to happen, but manipulating it. She asked Milchick if he did a 266 on Irv, and he's like, yeah, you know, I figured it'd be a way to keep him away from Bert. And she's like, well, you know, good initiative, you know, good job taking the reins on that. And so apparently these paintings were created to keep these two groups away from one another. Why? I don't know, but apparently it's working. You know, both of these groups, Dylan's suspicious of OND. The people in that other room are suspicious of MDR. And at the end of the episode, Bert brings Dylan and Irv into that room, and everyone looks really defensive and awkward before it ends. So I think the central mystery here is, one, did anything of this nature ever happen? Which I'm leaning toward no. Nothing probably ever happened, which then begs the question, why do these paintings exist? Why are these two groups being separated? And why now is there some sort of plan being put into action to where that MDR is being allowed to see the version of the painting where they are being killed? Like why is something going into play now to further keep them separated? And it must revolve around Bert and Irv. You know, they've clearly done these paintings to keep these two groups separate, and now with Bert and Irv kind of having a connection, this could potentially bring them together again, which I think is very clearly what Kobel is trying to avoid. We just need to figure out why. So, again, you know, we've been kind of theorizing about what's going on between Bert and Irv. You know, it's obviously clearly they have some sort of romantic connection, but what is the goal in making sure that in keeping this separate? Like, there's a line I think in the episode about personal connections, like not personal connection, but like dating internally and how that's frowned upon. So like, yeah, there's so many questions, man. This episode was kind of a weird one. Like it introduced a whole, just like every episode, I think, kind of introduces more questions, I think, than it does answers. But this was still a very fun one. There's a few things I want to talk about from this one, not just the painting situation, which obviously is very weird, and we want to know what that's about and why that's happening, or why that happened, why these paintings were created, and why they're being kind of like put back into the population now to keep everything separate. Got to figure out why these two groups are so separate from another. Even thinking just about proximity, the long distance, the winding halls, how they all look the same, the way the lights kind of move with them very, very closely too, and not like how, like, you ever been to one of those supermarkets where when you turn down like the frozen foods aisle, like a whole bunch of the freezers will light up? They don't even do that. It's like each small square section of the hallway that you walk in lights up and the rest stays dark. Like, what is the big deal about keeping these two groups separate? So we got to figure that out. So Helly, we find out she did live. I still think it's actually up in the air whether or not her hanging herself was meant to kill her. You know, I said last week that I felt like it was meant to send a message to her Audi, and we know that that's the case. She says to Mark at some point in the episode, like, I want my Audi to wake up taking her last breath and know it was me. Very, very Game of Thrones right there. Tell Cersei it was me. I want to know it was me. But that still doesn't say whether or not her goal was to, and I do believe this is the case for the record, but that doesn't say for sure whether or not her goal was to, you know, ascend the elevator and have her Audi wake up taking her last breaths under the assumption that the security guy would be there, which he was not, and rather than having her actually die. Because I feel like if she wanted to actually kill herself, then she could have done that anywhere. But then her Audi doesn't know anything. And she said her goal was for her Audi to be taking her last breaths and know it was her. I don't think that the goal here was to have the Audi take the last breaths and actually die. I think the goal was to have the Audi take the last breaths and realize, yo, my Innie is trying to kill me out here, and then have the security guy save her. But the security guy wasn't there. And they make it a point to linger on the clock. It shows when the security guy returns, it's 5:15. And it switches to 5:16. I wonder if we're supposed to take from that for future reference that the security guard goes on break at 5 or something. But I also wonder too, isn't that they have the staggered exits. So I feel like at no point around the 5 o'clock hour should the security guard be taking breaks. So I wonder if he was maybe lured away. But whatever the case may be, security guard's not there. Mark's leaving, so he calls the elevator back down, and he's the one who discovers Helly. He saves her. And eventually she comes back after a few days in the hospital. I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, though, because there's a couple of things I want to talk about as it pertains to how that whole thing played out. So Mark's sister goes into labor in this episode, and we find out that Mark goes to visit her. He gets the messages after he leaves work, and he goes to this cabin in this what looks like almost like a resort, almost like full of cabins for birthing. And he goes to this cabin, and one thing I noticed is that his brother-in-law, Rickon's messages were way more frantic than the actual situation that was going on in the room. This guy is clearly not all there, I think. And then when we see Mark reading his book in the bathroom, the book's a real piece of shit, man. It's like all of these weird, cliche, pseudo-intellectual phrases strung together. Like, it doesn't really make any sense. It's just like it just feels like if you were reading somebody's like fake deep Twitter timeline or some shit. It's not any good. And the reason I bring that up is when Mark gets there, Rickon says that, you know, to help, he said the baby is drawn to clean air, so he has to give a secret in order to help draw the baby out. Now, when this line happened, I thought this is stupid. This is a real stupid line. Like, how are you gonna fucking pay this off? Like, cause it felt very contrived to say, oh, the baby's drawn to clear air, so we got to give secrets. Here's my secret. Oh, what a coincidence. His secret informs Mark that he left his book on Mark's doorstep, and now Mark knows the book was taken. How convenient. But the thing the only reason I'm letting that slide and not calling that a really shitty way to get that information out is that they kind of make it track with the scene with Mark reading the book. Because if you don't have that scene, I'm looking at that like, okay, come on, man. Like this stupid ass reason is gonna be how Mark finds out that this book was left for him. Like, but with the book, like when you hear the kind of writing that's in the book, it now tracks that this guy would believe something like that and say something like that. That sounds like something from his book. Like, you know, babies need to be drawn to clean air when you're birthing them. And so it helps to share. So, like, that sounds like something that would be in that dumbass book. So it kind of makes sense. So, like, having that book scene prior helps me not turn my nose up at the way they, this incredibly ridiculous way that they use to help bring that information to light. So, yeah, I rolled my eyes at first, and I was like, but it does kind of track with him reading the book. So I let that slide. But the more interesting aspect of this whole situation is that Mark's sister is kind of obsessed with the cabin next door. It's like a really big, lavish cabin, and she's like, oh, whoever lives in there must be rich. Like, I wonder, well, not lives in there, but whoever's doing their birthing in there must be rich. I wonder who it is, yada, yada, yada. And later she goes for coffee. And for some reason, she decides that it's cordial, I guess, to like swing by and say, hey, can I bum a cup of coffee off of you? What a weird thing to do. Like, she said she was going for coffee. I assumed she was gonna like get in the car and drive somewhere to get coffee. And meanwhile, I'm wondering, like, y'all she just finished having contractions. Neither of you are a doctor. The doula's not there. You have no idea how far along she is into this labor, and you're just gonna let her leave by herself. Like, another indication that Mark and Rickon are just those completely oblivious men who just do not understand life and how women interact within it. They're just completely and totally awkward and stupid. But they let her leave. I don't know. I'm assuming her plan was to get in the car and go, but I guess her plan was to go dry bag around this fucking complex for coffee, which is such a weird thing to do. But she goes to this other cabin, and there's a guy outside who kind of like almost kind of runs off at her calling out to him. And she goes in, she has the coffee with the woman in there. Her name's Gabby. We find out that this woman, this is her third kid, and that's pretty much it. But we need to find out who this guy is. Like, whoever this guy is, that I'm assuming is Gabby's husband or whoever, the father of this kid, is gonna be somebody that's important to us. And at the time, and this is gonna make for a really good segue into my next topic, at the time, I thought that it was gonna be someone tied to Dylan in some way. Like, that was gonna be Dylan's wife. But then I saw the guy come out, I'm like, well, that's definitely not Dylan. But I still thought it might be tied to Dylan, like maybe Dylan is her doula or some shit. I don't know, because we heard him talking about hearing a baby when he was in the break room. So I'm like, oh, this has to be tied to Dylan. So I no longer think that's the case, because here's the segue. Later on, we see Mark and Helly discover a room with a guy feeding baby goats. I don't know what that's supposed to be. They theorize that it's tied to the work that they do. Mark kind of shoots that down. I doubt that it is, but I think that what we're meant to take away from this, which is also, I'm also confused that Helly didn't take this away from it as well, but I think that what we're meant to take from this is that this room is in close proximity to the break room, and that the guy that she was hearing is the guy who's feeding the goats, and the baby cries that Dylan was hearing are actually the baby goats themselves. And I'm surprised that Helly didn't go, oh man, I remember Dylan mentioning hearing babies crying, and then this baby goat sounds like a baby, because I thought it was a baby at first, like a human baby at first, until they got closer. And then I'm like, that doesn't really sound like a human. So I think that's what we're supposed to take away from that. What relevance will that have later? Like this baby goat room being next to the baker. I don't know if that's going to help them again with like placing things where they are in relation to one another, but I don't know where that's supposed to go. So we have a few new mysteries here. One, what is the purpose of these paintings? Why are they trying to keep OND and MDR separate? Two, what is up with this whoever's in this cabin that's next to Mark's sister's cabin? Who are these people? I figure they're probably tied to our people in MDR in some way. And then what was my third one? The painting. Oh, and what the fuck is this goat room? How did I forget that? What the fuck is this goat room? So those are the new mysteries that we had that we had added to our storyline this week. Not too many questions answered this week, other than what was going on with Helly and that she survived. But that's 14 minutes in. That's pretty much all I wanted to say about this episode as far as what we learned and what the questions that were asked. But I do have a couple of thoughts / questions. I guess my first question is, we see Irv kind of like trip balls again, right? And we see this tar-like substance coming from the ceiling. What is this? We still don't know what this tar is about. And then in that, I think like the first or second episode, he had a lot of dirt under his fingernails. We still don't know what that's about. I'm kind of like itching to figure out what that, like, this is such a tease, having this tar thing keep coming up again. What is going on there? Grainer is sent to find out who reintegrated Petey. And I'm wondering if that because this is mentioned twice in this episode as a mission that Kobel is sending him on. I'm wondering who this person is going to be, and if they're going to be somehow tied to anyone that we know as well. And then lastly, something that I thought was really cool that they did this episode When we start the episode off, it's Helly on the upper level, awake, choking from the hanging, with the elevator doors open and the security guard's not there. So we see Mark leaving. Mark calls the elevator back. Helly's in there. Him and Milchick take her down, and then Milchick immediately sends Mark out of there. And I thought Adam Scott did such a great job with this look of like he's panicking, like he just saw someone trying to hang himself. He's breathing heavy, and how they do that pass through where they're in the elevator and they kind of like switch brains. How he switched from like that panic to calmness, and I think they do something with the camera too that almost kind of like distorts his face a little bit. Like I can't recall, but I feel like it wasn't just a thing of like I'm panicking and then just like him transitioning into like his normal Audi Mark self. I almost feel like his face kind of warped a little bit almost. It's a really cool thing that they did, and a really cool job by Adam Scott to show that transition from that panic to that calmness on his face. That was really fucking cool. And then on the flip side of that, I loved how they did the opposite with, well, not the opposite with Helly, because we don't see Britt Lower or Lower, I don't know how you pronounce it, passing through the elevator. But I love how at one point, the last time we see her, she is choking from being hanged. Days later, when she comes back after the hospital, supposedly, when she passed through from the upstairs to the downstairs, her last memory of being downstairs was choking, so we find her on the floor in the elevator gasping for breath. I thought that was a really smart play by the show to just kind of just keep that consistency, right? So that everything tracks, and we don't look at that as like a plot hole. Like if Helly had just come back and she had the, say marks on her neck or something like that, somebody somewhere like on Reddit or something like that, or maybe someone like me would have been like, how does she come back, with her last time being choking when she left? How does she come back and she just standing up normal in the elevator? Like somebody would have called that out. So I'm glad that the show is looking at those little things to help keep the consistency and to help keep this narrative tight. So I thought that was really cool. So I'm going to wrap this one up. Another fun episode. This show continues to intrigue. We got more mysteries laid at our footsteps. I think we now have more mysteries than we could count. I probably couldn't even lay off all the unanswered questions, all the unanswered questions that we have at this point. But I'm assuming halfway through the season. So probably start time to get some answers, and I think we probably will next week. So I'll see you guys next week for episode 6. Peace.